Hi everybody out there in Radio Land, this is WRSP Going Through the Night, and I'm your host, David Robertson.
And he's joined as ever by Christopher Cotter, sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions.
And supported by you, the listener, listening every week, sharing our stuff, and, being part of this wonderful community. This week, talking of international, we've got another interview by Brianne Fallon, doing a great job for the RSP this year. And this time she's speaking to Caroline Blyth on the subject of religion and gender violence. Very important subject. So let's pass over to Brianne.
Religion and gender violence is an undesirable yet critical area of research in the field of religious studies. Violence inflicted against people of all gender and sexual orientations comes in numerous forms and is something to which many faiths are connected in some way. To discuss her research on this topic, Dr Caroline Blyth joins me today. Dr Blyth is a lecturer of religious studies in the School of Humanities at the University of Auckland's Faculty of Arts. Her research and teaching focuses on representations of gender and sexuality in religious discourses and popular culture, using feminist and queer theories to inform her work. She is currently writing a book about the biblical character Delilah and her representations on femme fatale in popular culture. And she's also working concurrently on a project that will consider the complex relationships between religion and gender violence. Caroline is also involved in a new student engagement project called Hidden Perspectives, bringing the arts out of the closet, which provides a platform for LGBTI student voices within the Faculty of Arts teaching and research community. Thank you so much for joining us today, Caroline, and welcome to the Religious Studies Project.
Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Now, religion and gender violence is unfortunately a really broad topic. What areas in particular do you focus on in your research?
Well, my own particular area of research is the Hebrew Bible. And so I kind of really started getting interested in this subject when I was doing my PhD thesis, looking at the way that the Bible itself talks about gender violence and some of these ancient attitudes that come out through these various texts. So while I'm kind of very interested to see how the Bible, these ancient texts speak about gender violence, my main area of concern has always been how the attitudes perpetuated within sacred texts actually, what significance they have in contemporary culture, and the way that these attitudes continue to perpetuate attitudes towards gender violence that are expressed and held and validated within particular sacred reading communities.
Now, I understand that you've used this term theologies of rape in some of your work. It's not really a term that I'm familiar with. If you could just run us through that and your work on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's actually I can't claim credit for it myself. It's a very evocative term that I read. It was an article in the New York Times by Rukmini Callimachi, who was writing about the rape and sexual slavery of Yazidi women by Daesh, Islamic State. And she wrote about this idea of rape being used almost as a sacred, almost like a form of like a religious ritual almost. And the way that members of Islamic State would take Yazidi women, would rape them, would sell them into slavery, and justify it by using various scriptures from the Quran or their own religious traditions, and use that to kind of validate the rape as almost like, as I say, a form of religious ritual. So many of the women spoke about the fact that their rapists would pray before raping them, or would say that this was a religious act that they were performing by raping someone who was not a member of their religious community. And so the the writer of this piece spoke about this attitude as a theology of rape, justifying rape through the use of religious justification, religious terms, religious ritual. And I just thought it was very evocative, and started to ask myself, can we see this kind of theology of rape anywhere else, either explicitly or implicitly? And some of certainly I would argue that in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish and Christian scripture, we do see that a very similar use of religious discourse and religious ritual to justify or validate rape. One example I'm writing about at the moment, which is for the Rape, Culture and Religion volumes that we'll be talking about later, was a particular text in Deuteronomy 21, where there's a law that allows for Israelite soldiers to take a woman that when they're out and they conquer a different community, and within that conquered community they see a woman that they like, they can take her for themselves as a wife. Now, that to me is just tantamount to rape during warfare, but it's expressed in a way that's justifying it by almost framing it in religious terms. It becomes a sort of ritualized form of gender violence, and I think that is very much that text itself is promoting a theology of rape. So that's where, as I say, that I can't claim ownership of the term itself, but I think it's really evocative in drawing up or bringing up the very complex and close relationship that religion can have to gender violence.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how you've pointed out how that's carried into contemporary times, as you've given the example of ISIS and these Yazidi women. Have there been any examples in your work where you've come across? We often focus upon violence against women and females.
Yes.
Has there been any examples in your work of violence against males or masculinity? I think it's something that we need to draw more attention to, in particular, something we really need to highlight and look at a little bit more. Have you looked at that in your work at all?
Yeah, a little bit, certainly. I'm very aware. I'm very aware that it is an often neglected area of study, the male rape and gendered violence against people who identify as male or masculine. I think it's something that, as I say, my own area of interest is the Hebrew Bible, and it's certainly something that's brought out in the Hebrew Bible. It's an event that is, it doesn't always happen, but it's threatened in the Hebrew Bible. And it's interesting that very often we see some of the same concerns or misperceptions about male rape that I think are very much present today. I still see that kind of contemporary significance coming out. Often biblical texts that talk about the potential for male rape get seen or get described as homosexual rape, or get framed in terms of male desire or same-sex desire. And that's something that I think is echoed very much around male rape. Some of the issues that we see in male rape today in contemporary culture, because I think that male rape is something that is incredibly stigmatized, is grossly underreported, and is very much part of the rape culture that affects female victims of rape, but it still affects men as well very much. And a lot of that is to do with the sort of misperceptions about gender violence that get tied to issues of masculinity. So we tend to think of men as naturally being the sexual aggressors and the pursuers of sexual gratification. And if a man becomes a victim of that sexual aggression, then they're almost demasculinized. And so there's a huge amount of stigma attached to that. And that's perpetuated by cultures where masculinity is say, framed in this way. It's almost become seen as a source of shame for a man to be raped, rather than seeing him as a victim or a survivor of a physical assault. He's seen as somehow less of a man. And I think that it kind of stems from, we can see it stemming from some religious traditions and religious texts, but it's also very much perpetuated in contemporary culture.
It's very interesting. You used the word survivor there, and that's definitely something you see in work about female victims or survivors of sexual violence, but that's not something you see so much in work on males or people who identify as males. And perhaps that is an area where we need to sort of change the language and the way we think about gender and gender violence in that way.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know I didn't tell you about this question, but is there a particular faith you've looked at specifically in terms of males and masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, one area that I worked on with an honours student earlier this year, and at the end of last year, she was wanting to write kind of do an essay for me on some aspect of male rape in religion, and she ended up focusing. We kind of worked on it together. We focused on Christianity and male rape, particularly men's ministries, which I know that they're probably more popular in the US, but also in Australia, I believe men's ministries are quite popular. And we looked at she started with the premise that, a ministry, a Christian ministry that focuses very much on sort of male bonding, male camaraderie, male community, could potentially be an incredibly helpful space for victims of gender violence to go to and to find some kind of healing in. But what she discovered when she did some research into the kind of the philosophy, the ethos of men's ministries, was that they're very often grounded in what is referred to as there's a focus on godly masculinity. That's the term that's often used, and that godly masculinity basically evokes all the same stereotypes that I'd kind of mentioned already. Men as powerful, authoritative, competitive, sexually aggressive. That's what being masculine or being a godly man entails. And she did some really fascinating research by looking at websites of various men's ministries, and they all evoke these stereotypes of the strong, authoritative man. A lot of them use sort of sporting metaphors or military metaphors are very common. The man is the sort of heroic, muscle-bound, assertive, aggressive family leader. There's not a woman in sight unless it's like a wife or a child who's being supported by this strong man. So, she came to the conclusion that this kind of community would be absolutely dauntingly horrendous for anyone whose masculinity was had been questioned by being a victim of gender violence to actually find any form of healing in. So that's the kind of area that we've looked at so far. But I think that kind of asking these questions about how is masculinity itself conceptualized within religious traditions is a really good place to start, because we often find that the religious discourses about masculinity can themselves be quite harmful, both for male survivors of gender violence and also for perpetuating the sort of rape myths and rape culture that obviously affect male and female victims of violence.
Definitely. Now, the idea of rape culture is something that you're working on quite extensively. I understand that you're editing a 3-volume series together with Dr. Emily Colgan and Dr. Katie Edwards called Rape Culture, Gender Violence and Religion, and that's going to be published with Palgrave Macmillan. Yep. And you have one of the contributors with you today. If you'd just like to introduce him and give us a bit of an idea about the book and what you're both contributing to those volumes.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you a very brief outline of the book, then I shall introduce Prior to you, and he can tell you about his contribution. It was actually something that Katie and Emily and I talked about, oh gosh, over a year ago. Just this idea that we really needed to gather together contributions about this whole question of how religion and gender violence and rape culture intersect with each other. And Emily and I thought we would start with one volume, and we put out a call for papers and ended up with, about 35, 36 really, really good submissions, yours included, Brianne. And we thought, this, we wanted to keep them all. And the thing that kept coming out was people sending them in kept saying, this is such an important area. It's so underrepresented, and we really need some, we do need some literature on it. So we got Katie involved too, because we thought we couldn't really handle all ourselves. And so, we decided to create these 3 volumes, one of which looks at kind of rape culture, gender violence and religion from global perspectives, one that focuses on biblical perspectives, and one that has a particular focus on Christian perspectives, because that's where most of the, or a lot of the contributors wanted to write about. And fortunately, Palgrave Macmillan agreed to publish it. Prior McRae, who's with me today, he is a student at the University of Auckland, and we met in the classroom, but also Prior's involved in the Hidden Perspectives project that you mentioned at the start. And so I was talking to him about these volumes, and he was very keen to be involved because what we identified, what the other editors, Katie and Emily and I identified initially, was that there were various areas that weren't really being represented adequately in the abstracts sent to us. One of these areas was that there really wasn't any engagement with the way that gender violence and religion intersects within the queer community. Another area that was underrepresented was the fact that most of the abstracts, most of the papers are going to focus very much on subjective violence or physical violence, but there's much less focus on symbolic violence, so that just the violence of speech, hate speech, and the way that is really a form of gendered violence, can be a form of gender violence as well, and contribute to rape culture. And there's also the structural violence, the violence that comes from both kind of secular and religious institutions, including laws, official religious responses to gender violence and rape culture, and also the official religious responses that come to with regard to the queer community, and how that in itself can be a form of violence, symbolic violence and structural violence. So I asked Prior if he was keen to contribute something with me to try and get this, even up this imbalance that I saw within the volume. So I'll pass over to him and he can tell you a bit about what he's going to be doing.
So I guess because I'm the area of queer that is my area of queer is the trans area. I guess that's what I would be talking about predominantly, because that's the area I've experienced. And I'm not too sure about how like the areas of religion and the queer community intersect for me so much, but I have noticed a definite trend in the queer community that there's a push, especially among trans people. There's a spiritual push, and I think it's predominantly because the process, like when you're queer, you essentially you experience a divide between the normal community, and you sort of have to distance yourself from it, or you become distanced from it. And I think that if the community you're from is a predominantly like Christian oriented or Christian, historically Christian, or like religious community, then you experience a divide from that. And so you therefore have to find yourself spiritually in a community that is now completely divorced from that religious-oriented thing. So I've noticed that among the transgender community, there's a sort of a spiritual aspect to transitioning, because when you do that, you let go of the spiritual community that you were part of previously, the Christian-oriented one for most of us. I don't know if that's even relevant.
It is hugely relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that we spoke about as well, and again, that's something I want to bring into the book, and I think that's what you're touching on here, is that it's not, while they're in one respect, traditional religious communities, say the Christian community or the Muslim community or the Jewish community, have their own have various diverse attitudes towards queerness and towards queer members of that community. But there's also something that goes beyond that, and looks more at the spirituality of a person, which extends beyond just being part of a religious community, but just goes deep into the sort of idea of wellness and well-being and just sort of spiritual health of an individual. And I think that's something else I want to tap into in the volumes. You know, we talk about religion and tend to think of it in terms of the big infrastructures, but the actual personal spirituality of a person, whether they belong to a religious tradition or not, I think is really important and is hugely impacted by experiences of gender violence in whatever form it takes. So I think that's something Prior and I are planning to write a chapter together, having a kind of conversation about all these things and kind of seeing where it will go. And I think that's it, in a way that we can kind of draw on some of these threads that often get neglected in discussions.
And I think there's something that has definitely been talked about a lot within the transgender community is the gender violence, the aspect of it that you were just talking about, like the masculinity aspect, and how say like a male victim of rape has now experienced something that people see as detracting from his masculinity. Something that a lot of people notice when they come out as transgender is that once you start like passing, essentially, people taking you as whatever gender you are, once you tell them, like, so they'll accept you because they don't realize that you're trans. But once you tell them that you're trans, then they change. And so for me, when I tell men that I'm transgender, and before that they were perfectly accepting of me, and they would do like the bro thing or like the man thing with me, and that would be fine. And then once they find out that I'm transgender, there's this thing, and they go, you were raised female, you didn't experience that childhood of maleness that I experienced. And I think that there's like this sort of disbelief in their head, like, how can you be male if you didn't experience all the shit that I experienced growing up as a man? Like, I think there's this formation of masculinity that is entirely socially designed. It's not real, and that's that. Yeah, and so like if you're a trans man, you don't experience that. So there's a sort of that's a very interesting perspective, to be a man in the world without having experienced that formation of masculinity.
And I think what we're kind of wanting to tap into is how these reactions from other people, they can be mild and minor, and they might not be a physical attack on you, but it's like I think I talked to Prior earlier about just death by 1,000 paper cuts, the way these little, well, they're not little in a way, but they may seem little to other people, but these reactions of people to queerness, I think are very much a genuine and a genuine form of gendered violence that build up and can really affect a person's spirituality and sense of self.
Well, if we're talking about the build up of certain reactions, like as in, like a sort of, even if you're socially accepting of queer people but not understanding, or like even if you're not actively being violent towards them, but you haven't like accepted who they are, then that leads to things like in New Zealand, the lack of medical treatments for transgender people. And it's like treating transsexuality medically reduces death because, like, you know, most trans people will attempt to kill themselves, or will if they're not treated medically. And so, like, then, you know, not having, like, having rules that say, oh, you're not allowed to physically attack a trans person, that's good. But then not having laws saying all trans people's medical needs are covered, that's, until I'm living in a society that completely covers publicly my medical requirements, like any other medical requirements, then I am not being accepted as a full valid person, and my identity is not being accepted. So that's the kind of structural violence which can lead to death and, you know, massive amounts of suffering. And so that would be like an extreme version of the structural violence.
So
that's a kind of a potted version of all the things we're going to try and cram into our chapter for the volume.
So you're pulling out some really sort of ideas that we don't look at very often, and I think that's really important. And the idea of, you know, that personal spirituality, you know, not just, you know, big structural religion, is really important when we're talking about gender, and particularly the LGBTIQ community. Now, my last question was going to be, you know, do you think there's anything we need to draw particular attention to? And I think we've kind of covered that a little bit. So I wondered if you just wanted to, I think I heard right, you've both been a part of hidden perspectives, bringing the arts out of the closet. If you just wanted to maybe tell us a little bit about that program that you're involved in.
Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about the kind of origins of it. Then perhaps Prior can give you a sense of what you think about it as a participant. So I can't claim credit for the name Hidden Perspectives. It's actually we borrowed it with their blessing from a project run by the University of Sheffield by Katie Edwards, who's co-editing the Gender, Violence and Religion volumes with me. And it started there as a kind of public engagement, student engagement project. And Katie was always encouraging me to start something similar here. So we broadened it out. While theirs is focused more on their religious studies department, we broadened it out here to the Faculty of Arts and moved from public engagement to very much student engagement. So I run it with my colleague Chip Matthews, and what our vision for it really is to provide both a platform for queer student voices across the Faculty of Arts, but also to provide a kind of safe social and academic community, like a safe space for queer students to meet, talk about, well, get to know each other, socialise, but also talk about their work and their academic work as queer researchers and queer students. So it's going to be, as I say, we've just launched it, and we started off with a movie screening and panel discussion earlier this semester. And next year we're going to have a much more a kind of an official launch, as well as some more social and academic events. I'll let you say what you were at the movie screening Prior, so you can maybe say what it means to you and how you consider it to be important.
It was just really nice to have something to go to that I felt like there'll be a sense of community, because I had felt kind of divorced from any sense of community. I mean, there are some queer groups on campus, but they're very disorganized, and the times that I've tried to go to them, I haven't felt. It just felt like attempting to get into like an exclusive social club, and I wasn't welcome, and so that was kind of disheartening. And so this was sort of like a more a less cliquey kind of just a general group, and everyone could kind of come. And having the movie was a great idea, I think, like, because people could like watch the movie and kind of have that sort of sense of, you know, that chest feeling that you get when you watch a movie with a whole bunch of people and everyone's getting it. But, you know, it was nice to know that there was like a sort of a group thing that wasn't just about like, you know, maybe hanging out or anything. It was more about, you know, talk and having that panel thing at the end was really good, because you got to talk about things. And I really liked it that we weren't just talking about like queer minorities. We're talking about minority groups in general helping each other. It was really great having like people talk about like being a Maori queer and stuff, like the Maori queer. No, then, you know, like that kind of thing. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
and
very intersect.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the project more comes from, you know, the academics and the academic community, and in that way it's supported sort of from that higher up level. And
yes.
you know, so that's really important because, you know, you're being supported by academics, and in that way it's, you know, it's coming from a completely different perspective. And that's probably something that, you know, maybe other universities could think about taking on and supporting their students in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Auckland University is very committed to queer, supporting all equity groups, but and including queer staff and students. I mean, they really are excellent. I think most all the faculties have their own rainbow. We call them rainbow groups, which are these supportive communities. But I think arts, this is the first time they've taken a kind of more academic lead. And I think that is really important because I think it's tapping into something that students can really invest in. And also it's really tapping into academic staff and professional staff commitment to supporting queer students. So I'm really excited. I was really delighted to be asked to be part of this, and I'm deeply excited about continuing on with it next year.
Well, it sounds like an absolutely fantastic project, and we will definitely keep an eye out for your series, Rape, Culture, Gender Violence and Religion, which will be coming out soon. And I'd like to thank you both for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on a critical topic.
Thank you very much, Brianne.
Thanks very much for that, Brianne. Wonderful to hear another interview from you. And again, on an important topic, and ties in with number of interviews that we've had on that sort of religion, gender intersection. So do check out those other interviews on our website. I can think of Lisbeth Michelson, Marta Czebatowska, Anna Fideli, and there's a few other ones up there as well. So do have a look. The astute listener a couple of weeks ago will have noted that we record these introductions a couple of weeks at a time. So we posted Bruce Sullivan when we meant to post Finbar Curtis, and it was all hilarious. But it got sorted out thanks to Liam Sutherland flagging it up. So maybe you didn't notice, but maybe you did notice, and that'll have given you a nice little glimpse behind the curtain.
Well, this is all because we're getting more organised these days. You know,
Exactly.
the better the team runs and the better our organisation, you know, the further ahead we are. It's good to be a few weeks ahead. I've said before, you know, the order that the interviews come in, that they're recorded, is not the order that they go out, because we have to get responses scheduled. We have to take our breaks, as always. We need to have a few in the bank, you know, in case of emergencies. We need to think about, you know, you don't want to get 6 podcasts by the same interviewer from the same conference in a row.
God forbid.
God forbid. So, you know, we record the intros separately, and we record them 2 weeks at a time, 2 weeks ahead of time, so that they can stay relatively topical. But, you know, we're busy men with busy lives, and, you know, so every 2 weeks we can manage to get together in the same room. The rest of the time it's mostly just insulting each other on social media.
Yeah. If you'd like to insult us on social media, you can do so on Facebook, on Twitter, on Google Plus.
Nice one.
Also on YouTube as well. And even in the iTunes comment section, you can leave a nice insult there for us.
Drop us comments, criticisms and questions into the, you know, on our website, on the WordPress site. Get involved in the discussion there, or even email us. If you want to email a question or comment, we might read it out on air, and that's editors@religiousstudiesproject.com.
Yes, we'd like to think of ourselves as the sort of the online international seminar room, as it were. So, you know,
Yeah, so if anybody wants to send in a short lecture disguised as a question, then send it to editors@religiousstudiesproject.com.
Don't forget about our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links. And come back next week for another interview that Sydney has recorded for us. The topic is South American Church-State Relations. That's with Marco Joaco Palomino. And that'll tie quite nicely into our interview from a couple of weeks ago with Finbar Curtis on the sort of religion-state relationship in the US, and that'll be very nice to discuss the parallels there.
Other than that, though, Chris, there's one thing you've forgotten to mention.
Dunno.
Thanks for listening.